the metaphor of the reed flute is like the instrument that makes no sound. You can have a flute and it's sitting on a table and it won't sing until the breath is blown through it, And so the dervish is like that flute, just available for that breath to pass through. And the death of the nafs by stages, there's more than one, allows that flute, that instrument, that vessel, to be cleaned more and more, so that also corresponds to the increasing capacity. The capacity, in a way, I think we were talking about that also earlier this afternoon, to be able to get into this expansion, the expanded state, and not lose your feet. Right? As the dervishes are turning, that expansion, it happens. I won't speak for everyone here, there are other dervishes here. And one has to maintain awareness of one's place in the circle. You know that it may be a stationary turn for a while, but then there's also a stepping turn or a step turn where you are turning and moving as you're turning. And so one needs to know spatial relationships as well. Can't go to sleep. But this position, and this one is down, this position is to receive that which is given so generously and so freely that without making any effort, without me going like this, or doing anything, but just allowing oneself to be of service, then the prayer is for humanity. And we sure go through stages where it's our own intoxication and our own high that happens initially, and our own dizziness and all of that, because one isn't yet clear. That's part of at least for me, that's why I used to get dizzy, is because I was not clean. We just wanted to say those few things about the movements in that dance. They're just those two, the stepping and the turning.
Well, I had a story I wanted to tell tonight, so since it's still coming up, I will. It's a personal story, and it's a much older story. And it leads us again to the practice of zikr, and with some of the themes we were working with this afternoon. As I mentioned, 30 years ago, I was with a group. I was actually the manager of the group, going around to visit various teachers and friends of Murshid Samuel Lewis who were still alive in Pakistan and India. As a preparation, we also went to visit the Habedi and the Mevlevis in Turkey, and at that point, which was late 79, actually this was late 78, early 79, it was still outlawed. Turkish Sufism was still very much undercover, and the long sort of cloak and dagger to go and do zikr with the Habedis and the Mevlevis and all that. But the part I'm going to jump to is in Lahore, Pakistan, when we visited a friend of Murshid Samuel Lewis, whose name I've forgotten. I have to look this up in my notes, because it's embarrassing. But we always just called him the Coffee Sheikh, because he ran a coffee store, and he sold coffee beans. And when we went to do zikr with him, we went above his shop, and he just poured out a big pile of beans in the middle of the floor. Tasnim heard me tell the story. And with each zikr, he just sort of pulled one of the beans towards you. And I, for many years, I just remembered this strange zikr he gave us. It was very odd zikr. It's the zikr of Jonah in the belly of the whale. And I couldn't remember it. But then I looked it up, and it actually is in the Quran, in Surah Anbiya, which mentions, Al-Anbiya mentions a number of different prophets and so forth. And there is actually a zikr of Jonah in the belly of the whale. And so I became more and more interested in zikr in the belly of the whale and all this. And so lately I've gotten into old Sufi stories. So I wanted to look up the story of the full story of the Sufis, way Sufis would tell the story of Jonah, which is a little different than it is in the Bible. There are similarities, there are differences. In the source that I found, it goes something like this, which I've retold for you all. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, Jonah was born into a small village in the Middle East. And at that point, throughout that region, it was recognized that sometimes a child would be born with unusual abilities. And like in the shamanic societies of Eurasia, that person would then be schooled or apprenticed to become the person who would be the sort of the channel or the shaman, or who could go within and then bring something through for the benefit of a person or healing for the community or whatever it might be. So this is, I think you recognize it's a theme. So Jonah was one of these unusual children, and so they sent him to prophet school. That's the story. And so he trained, he became a very good prophet. And again, a prophet didn't mean that he foretold the future or what the lottery numbers would be or anything like this. The prophet just meant that he received from the source what was meant to be given to the people, to the community. He received from within, and he was able to bring it out in a, sort of a clean way, without a lot of self, with lots of fana. And Jonah was really good at this. And he was the prophet of his community. He was the Nebi, which would be the Hebrew word for that. He had a wife, he had a couple of kids, and he was quite happy. But then one day, again, remember this is the Islamic story, Allah calls him and he says, "Hey, Jonah, I got a job for you." And Jonah says, "Vad, I'm very happy right here." And Allah says, "No, you've got to go to Nineveh. Nineveh needs you." And he says, "What's the problem in Nineveh?" Well, the problem in Nineveh is they're all at each other's throats and they need more unity, and you've got to go and tell them, La ilaha illallah, period. There's no reality but the one. Stop arguing, all this stuff. And he says, but I've got a job here, and I got a family, I got a house, and I'm the prophet of my village, and it's all copacetic, as we'd say. It's all fine. And Allah says, "No, you got to go. Go to Nineveh. Go. Take your family. Just go." And so, okay, we're gonna go. So he takes his family, and they're traveling. And they come to a very large river on the outskirts of Nineveh. And it just so happens at that time there's a big storm. And there's a sort of flash flood that swells the river. Just as they're sort of getting ready to enter the river. And Jonah's sort of a little ahead with one of his sons, and his wife is behind with the other of his sons. And to make a long story short, they get separated. And Jonah goes to the other side. He says to his son, "Okay, wait right here. I'm going to go back, try to find them." He goes back. He can't find them. His wife and the other son, they've sort of been washed down river or something. He doesn't know. He goes back to find the other son on the other shore. He's gone. And so Jonah's alone. Yeah. So he goes to Nineveh and he says, "Okay, Allah, well, I'm going to do what you told me to do, and please, help me find my family too, if you would." And so he goes and he starts preaching to the people. He says, "La ilaha illallah, Allah sent me to you. I know you don't know me. I'm sort of a foreigner. You're Assyrians and I'm from, Canaanite Hebrew. But, Allah sent me, and there's only one reality, and so listen up and treat each other right." And they just begin throwing vegetables at it, bananas. I don't know if there's any bananas in ancient Nineveh, but anyway, it's fruit, there's vegetables, there's tomatoes. You just have a terrible time. Nobody's listening to him at all. And Jonah goes back to Allah and he says, "Allah, this is really a mess you've gotten me into. They're not listening at all. I lost my family. I should really go back and look for my family. And, I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to do what's right. And, and they're not listening at all. And Allah says, just be patient. Go back. Just keep trying. And Jonah goes back, and they're still throwing vegetables at him and all that stuff. And he goes back and forth to Allah several times, like the Bible has in this story with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just sort of a similar theme. And finally Jonah says, I've been here months, I'm full of the vegetables are all I'm turning into a salad. It's harming the economy because they're throwing so much of their produce they're not listening at all. And Allah says, okay, go back and tell them, unless they listen up, I'm sending the fire. I'm going to send the fire if they don't listen up. So Jonah goes back and says, okay, la ilaha illallah, if you don't listen now, Allah's sending the fire, and you're all going to be toast. I told you, it's a modern midrash. So, and they still not listening. He goes back, and Allah says, no, try once more. And then finally, like a couple of people are listening. But Jonah's getting really impatient. He goes back to Allah and he says, a few, like one or two people are listening, but you told me, unless they all listened, you were going to send the fire. And, I still got to go find my family, and this, and Allah said, no, just go back, be patient. Don't be so rigid, just relax. It's not going to be the way you think it's going to be. And Jonah says, that's it, I quit. I'm fed up with the whole thing. I'm turning in my prophet's license. Nothing but problems since I got here. I lost my family. I'm fed up with you, Allah. I'm out of here. So he rips up his prophet's license, and he heads off and catches a boat on the Black Sea. And this is where the whale part starts. Now in the Bible, as you recall, if you want to compare, he has all the whale bits are all before he gets to Nineveh, but here it's all after. And so he leaves on a boat on the Black Sea, and it's similar. A big storm comes up, and similar to the Bible story, the sailors are somewhat superstitious, and they believe, if this storm has come up so suddenly, there must be someone who's bad luck aboard. Yeah. And so, in the Bible's version, they cast lots. If you remember, they draw straws or whatever. Jonah gets the short straw. In the Islamic story, they're about to do this sort of divination process, but Jonah sort of fesses up, and he says, oh, don't even bother with the straws, or the shells, or whatever the heck you're going to do. It's me. Back in Nineveh, I didn't, and he tells him the story, and he just says, Jonah says, okay, just throw me overboard. I've had it, I've lost everything. I'm at the bottom. Just throw me overboard. And so they do. They toss him overboard. And the whale comes. He gets swallowed by the whale, and then he's in the belly of the whale, and he's doing this particular zikr, which is in the Quran. The whole story isn't in the Quran, but the zikr is in the Quran. In fact, it's the only part of the story that's actually in the Quran. The rest is from Islamic. The rest is from Islamic, medieval Islamic recounts of the story of Jonah. And Sufi stories and like that. So Jonah's in the belly of the whale, and he's doing this zikr, which I'm going to teach you now. And it's not that long. It's short, and it's very deep. And we already learned the most difficult word of it this afternoon, which also is the zalim. So it's another one of those zalim zikrs. Not solemn, but zalim. That's right. And it is a very beautiful zikr the more and more I reflected on it in the last few years. I retranslated the whole passage of the Quran around this in the new version of Desert Wisdom. Because what the zikr is really saying is, Jonah says, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illa anta, there's no reality but you, Allah, Subhanaka. Subhanaka, you are the Subhan. You are that sense of, you could say, purity, that sense of what was before any lifetimes. You are the original face, using a Buddhist metaphor. You are that Subhan, that purity before we came into any embodiment, before we had the bad childhood or the bad experiences, any of that. You are that pure, that sort of purity within me. And I was way too rigid. I was way too rigid about the way things were going to look. I was holding to this fixed vision. I was a prophet, and I had this little life, and I had that's going to happen. It's all going to be neat. And I went to Nineveh. It had to happen this way. But I was way too rigid about all this. But I was just doing my best. I was trying to fulfill my divine image. And so here I am in the belly of the whale. So the whole last bit is mercifully short. And it is, so say with me, La ilaha illa anta. La ilaha illa anta. So instead of illallahu, it's illa anta. Anta means you, so it means no reality except you. La ilaha. La ilaha. Illa anta. Illa anta. Subhanaka. 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 It means you are the Subhan. Subhanaka. You are that purity in me, which is still as it was at the beginning. And then this beautiful last bit, we repeat La ilaha illa anta. La ilaha illa anta. And then Jonah says Inni. Inni. Which is difficult to translate. Really, the best translation would be like, for sure. Yeah, they usually translate indeed or verily, but really it's like the German doch or indeed, it's like for sure. Inni kuntu min azalamin. Min azalamin. Inni kuntu min azalamin. For sure, I was existing within the Zalam, within the depths, but also trying to fulfill that depths of my own divine image, in my own way. And it's such a beautiful metaphor because here he is in the belly of the whale. He's in the depths of the depths, and he's in his own depths. And for me, I just had this whole image of us as humanity within the depths of nature, and sort of in the deep doo-doo. Not even knowing that we're in the depths of the depths, that we're embedded in nature. We're the newest of the beings, so to speak, but all of nature around us is telling us, hey, time for a little zikr, time for a little humility. So that's only one level. Yeah, you're like, well, it's more ta'wil than tafsir, but nonetheless. It can be tafsir, I think. Different types of interpretation. All right. So what are we doing? I'll tell you after we do the zikr. We'll take it step by step, and as I say, the La ilaha illa anta is repeated. So you'll get that for sure. Okay, here we go. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka la ilaha illa anta inni kuntu min azalamin. So slowly. La ilaha illa anta. And now twice subhanaka, which goes like this. Subhanaka, 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 subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta. And then the last bit goes Inni kuntu min azalamin. Inni kuntu min azalamin. So it begins sort of on the offbeat. It goes La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka subhanaka. The second one is subhanaka subhanaka. Back to the beginning. La ilaha illa anta. And the last bit it is. Inni kuntu minna zalamin. Inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka subhanaka. La ilaha illa anta inni kuntu minna zalamin. La ilaha illallah The Bible says he was doing it for 40 days and 40 nights. The Islamic story doesn't really mention how long it was. But sooner or later, the whale got fed up. Or by Allah's grace, simply went. And Jonah was belched onto the shore and wandered off dazed and confused in the direction of Nineveh until he came again to the banks of that same river where he lost his family. And it just so happened that at that moment, coming floating down the river, was his wife and one of his sons whom he had lost. And he said, "Where have you been? You were gone. I was there for months. They were throwing tomatoes at me. And now I've had a whole change of heart, and I realize, it doesn't have to be difficult." And his wife said, "Well, we were swept down the river. It was this flash flood, but we were taken in by a very nice family, and we lived there, and we were trying to find out, where you were. We knew you were going to Nineveh, but we were washed so far downstream they didn't even know where Nineveh was." And so just this morning, we woke up and we felt, we need to go back to that same place where we lost you. And so we went back, and miraculously here you are. He said, "Well, you've got a boat, let's cross to the other side. We'll see if we can find our other son." And just coming over the sand dunes. Yes. It was the other son who had been taken in by a friendly stonemason in a neighboring village, and had suffered a concussion from the crash and all that, and so had lost his memory, and so didn't really regain his memory until just that morning, and decided to set off again to that same place where he had lost his family. So you reunited. I know, I'm stretching it. I'm drawing from a bunch of other little stories, Arabian Nights and things, but nonetheless, no, they were all reunited, as you can read it in Qisas al-Anbiya, it's traditional stories of the prophets. They were reunited, they went back to Nineveh, and Jonah again began to, preach, but, without a lot of expectation that people were going to listen to him. He was just going to do what he could and try to be a benefit to this new community, and he and his wife and his children, and they all lived there. Not exactly happily ever after, but, not blissfully happy, but they were happy enough. It'll do, it'll do. As my Murshid, as Moinuddin once told me, he said, sometimes your worst is good enough.
And they opened a salad bar.
And they opened a salad bar. All you can eat. Soup kitchen. That's it. That was it.
So tie it back to the coffee beans.
Yes. Well, it turns back to the story with outside of the story. Yeah, we just did the coffee beans for a while, and then when the coffee beans were gone from the middle of the circle, we just pushed them all back and started all over again. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how long is this going to go on? But it did end sooner or later, and then we had some coffee, and it was really nice. Now, I was just with Bashir Fatima, who was on that trip, and she said she didn't remember it at all. But I think she was gone that day shopping. Because could have been. But, it did happen. Just like I told you. Yes, it's true.
It reminds me, I went to Konya, Turkey, and I had an appointment to be at Suleymaniye's house, and when I arrived, I walked in, and on one side of the door, sitting there, was Iqbal Lewis, from a friend of ours, a brother of ours from San Francisco, and there I am in Konya, Turkey. Walk through the door, and there's Iqbal. He looks at me, I look at him, and says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What are you doing here?" Anyway, he was there with Murshid Hassan.
That's another story.
The old days. That's And I said, "Well, I'm here with Suleymaniye," and Murshid Hassan was on his way back to Israel, Palestine, but wanted to stop by and see Suleymaniye, who was the sheikh of Konya. And they didn't speak each other's languages except for Quran. Quran was the mutual language. So I don't know what happened. Truthfully, I don't know what happened. Except next thing we're like getting our stuff and we're leaving. We're all leaving the house, the four of us. And no, the three of us. It was Iqbal had come to invite Dede to come and visit Murshid Hassan, who wasn't feeling well and was in the hotel in this huge bed, little man. He was a little man sitting in the bed, and we arrived in his hotel, and they didn't speak each other's languages except for Quran, and they're reciting things back and forth, and Iqbal and I just sitting there, flies on the wall, and then was it Dede? Maybe perhaps Dede reached into his suit pocket. He always wore a suit, and he pulled out these photographs, and he was showing them to Murshid Hassan. Of course, we were curious, what are they doing? And then Murshid Hassan reaches over, and he's got a little collection of photographs, and they're showing each other's photos to each other. And so Iqbal and I go over and snoop. And the curious thing was that they were each showing each other a photograph of Murshid Hassan with Pir Vilayat, and Suleymaniye with Pir Vilayat. They were making that I don't know how, I can't interpret it, I have no interpretation except that I saw it and Iqbal saw it. We both saw that. That was interesting.
Great. Sufi, ways of connection.
I'll tell you something, I have been a smoker for like 2.5 years when I was in high school, like when it was cool. I even had a cigarette holder. Talk about affectation.
That's cool.
Exactly. I would be like the most cool, I'm like 15 years old. That's cool. Anyway, to top it off, it was Sherman's.
Yeah, right.
Extravagance upon extravagance. Anyway, so, but it was a short-lived experiment, and I stopped, and I actually don't like to be around cigarette smoke. So,
Yeah, right.
you're in Turkey, where between every ilahi, it's like everybody, the whole room is filled with smoke. It's a little room. It's a little room, and we're doing zikr, and it was beautiful. And then the smoke. And
It's like second, third, and fourth hand smoke.
and Dede kept extending the cigarette package to me, and I'd say, no, thank you, I don't smoke. And a friend of ours, Daoud, an American who'd been living there for some time, he said, when the sheikh offers you something, you take it. I said, oh, okay. So the next time cigarettes come around, I get a cigarette, light it up, and I didn't inhale. But that and another similar sort of experience where Dede shared some food from his plate with me. And you go, oh, I'm eating the food off of somebody else's plate. It's not. It is such barakah. It's such a blessing for the sheikh to give you, because of all the mystical meaning behind it too. The feeding of the dervishes. I remember crying a lot. My whole visit there, just I couldn't contain it. It was more than I could hold. The beauty of the adab. Right. Never mentioned the word. I never heard. In fact, I learned the word much later. But I lived the experience of adab, of a courtesy that recognizes who it is that they are serving. Right? It wasn't me. No. Right. And there's the tradition is how to welcome the guest. How to welcome the guest. G is capitalized. We speak of God, Allah, as dost, right, as the friend. Sufis refer to God in this very personal, intimate way as the friend, as the dearest, nearest friend, and also as the guest that one would prepare for, especially if some dignitary's coming, and you might even go out and buy brand new sheets and have a special pair of slippers and flowers by the night table and what anything that you would think of. To show your, more than respect, the honoring of the guest. So this is part of life. It's not necessarily protocols that you have to follow and that sort of thing, but it comes with a refinement of character. As we dance and sometimes take the volume lower, right, more quiet, and then into silence. That is refinement. It is refining the energy. It's refining the sound. So this refinement, you can't brush up next to it and not be affected by it, not carry something of that perfume back with you. So this being an American-born practice, right? We didn't import it from some other country. It was birthed in America. Something made in America. Because we have a very active society, and so the way in, you look for the door. That's another aspect of tasawwuf. When you enter a new land, you come to a new town, you don't come in imposing how you do it back in the States, which is how a lot of people do, right? You come in quietly, respectfully, and you observe. What are the customs here? Oh, they do it that way. All right. So in order to make that connection, to bridge that difference of cultures, you do as the Romans do. So that goes the saying. Then that connection is made, that confidence is built, and then gently, speaking now about how a murshid might work with a murid, is you watch them and you see what their tendencies are. You notice their nature as well as their character and their personality, because the nature is one thing, the personality is something else, the character is something else. And you don't want to harm the nature, but as Murshid Saadi was saying, maybe you want to assist that which is naturally arising into becoming refined. It's already strong and present, it just needs to be refined. So the art and science, and this really is what it is an art and a science to guide a soul, to guide a murid. And the relationship between them is a relationship of respect, but it's one where the respect arises because of love. Again, you might have a feeling of awe or fear or intimidation, or that can look like you're being respectful, but really it's not. It's something else that's happening. But when that heart connection is made and there's the love stream flowing between you, it very naturally comes about. So in the training of dance leaders, likewise, we're challenged with that because they come with such enthusiasm, especially people that are not connected to any Sufi school. And that was, I'm going to bring it back around a little bit to our talk. When we were sitting, I'll never forget, hours, we sat in this Indian restaurant in Berkeley, pulling from our own experience and sharing with it, well, how was it with you, and what can we apply from the practices that we did and the discipline and the retreats, and so to apply that now to we were working on the certification guidelines for dance leaders, and the challenge was that we had brought a practice that had only been shared in the context of Sufism, of Tasawwuf, but now we were bringing it out to the public and not requiring initiation into the order, any order, for which brother took the brunt of the flack. Nevertheless, one of the things that we put into the guidelines was that person find an authentic teacher to work with for a certain period of time, hoping that encounter with an authentic teacher would work on their nafs. And I don't know whether we succeeded or not, or in some cases it worked, in other cases not. Especially when people say, well, my teacher is Ramtha. Nothing against Ramtha, but already it is not a person in the body. In other words, where's the ego check? It's absolutely necessary. You can say, well, Ramtha told me this and Ramtha told me that, and so I have liberty to do this and that. But when you have a living teacher, it's a different matter. You can't do that. I mean, you can't get away with it very much.
Kuntu min zalimin.
That's what I say.
Anyway.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, maybe we'll continue tomorrow. Maybe move a little more now. What do you think?
Yes.
Do you have some other zikr for us? What about that one I used to love that you used to do? Yeah, that one.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, Malika's got it.
Okay. All right.
That one.